Good afternoon, everyone. Well, as you can see, we've already started up here. I don't know what you're all yakking on about. No, it's an absolute delight to have a packed, of course it would get packed. Electrification, everyone gets very excited and runs over to have a look. It's a delight to have you all here. Welcome to the Engineering Theatre. Thank you, first of all, to Pandrel for sponsoring the Engineering Theatre for the second year in a row. Absolute delight to be supported by them again. But also thank you to an esteemed panel of Noel Dolphin, who's head of UK projects at Fure & Frey, to Ollie Glover, who is next to me here, who's MP for Didcot and Wantage and a member of the TSC, the Transport Select Committee. And in the middle, John Humferson from Siemens. He is the Electrification Director for Rail Infrastructure. We've already had half a session up here, so I suppose what I should do is probably loop you all in. The way I'm going to loop you all in is just without me yakking on and giving you the context, because we're kind of, probably everyone here is aware of, the problems and challenges. Ollie, what did you convince Haynes to say at the Transport Select Committee? You just said to me, what was the concession you got out of him?
We were talking on the Select Committee about the challenge of rail investment and how there's been a lack of an enhancement pipeline. And of course, I asked him about electrification because it's something I'm always boring on to everybody. And he said it was incontrovertible, that's his word, not mine, that a commitment to a rolling programme would significantly bring down costs, stimulate supply chain, and enable us to achieve a lot more. And we already know that's the case because Germany, for the last 40 years, well, more than that actually, has been electrifying an average of 200 kilometres a year. And for them, it isn't some exotic, obscure, extreme engineering process. It is just normal life, and they're carrying on doing it now. Yes, they're doing battery stuff on lightly used lines where appropriate, but they are continuing with mainline electrification, and so should we.
But you see, the problem, Ollie, is that you can't have a rolling programme because we're not cheap enough to electrify yet. So, but then, wait a minute, but how do we get cheaper if we don't have oh, wait, I see the problem here. So, in the context of the fact that we are not getting a rolling programme of electrification, well, anytime soon, certainly not in the spending review, what is it that we can do as an industry? Well, there are two things I want to investigate here. The first is, what do we do in the meantime in an environment that's extremely hostile to effective implementation and hostile to innovation, by the way? But frankly, with electrification, Siemens will talk about innovation, and some of the stuff they're doing is fantastic. But really, with electrification, we know the science. It's about the implementation. So, first thing I want to talk about is what do we do in the space that we have been given? And then the second thing I want to pick out is, what should we be shouting with a unified voice as an industry at a very important moment where we have more power to shape our industry now than at any point in history for the last 20 years at least, if not much longer, as GBR is still in a weird blobby amoeba shape that no one's really decided on yet. Now's the time to get in there as an industry and shout with a single voice. So those are the two things I want to kind of pick up on. And unlike the last session, given we have a packed house, I will try and squeeze in some questions at the end as well. So with all of that yakking on, the first point, what do we do? We have this challenge with electrification that we know, a railway is incomplete without electrification. And if you have, for the context, if you have fast trains, if you have freight trains, and if you have frequent trains, the only viable answer is conventional electrification. Like anything short of that will take away at least one of those three Fs, right? John is saying, well, but basically that's essentially the state of play, right? So within that space, what can we do to at least get us moving as an industry and potentially make the sell to Treasury, because it's Treasury that we're banging on the door of, a bit easier? John, I'll start with you. I think on this one I think I know where I want you to go, and I'm going to let you fly and see what you think. What do you think, from a Siemens perspective, also from your view? What can we do within the space we've been given?
So I think we just need to recognise that it's a system, don't we? Yeah. So it's not just electrification; it's rolling stock. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of rolling stock that's up for renewal. We need to do something here and now. We're not going to get everything electrified in time, so it's about doing something different. And for us, that's about looking alongside our rolling stock colleagues at battery biomode trains, looking to see whether we can create some charging infrastructure at end stations so we can get rid of these diesel trains that are polluting the infrastructure that we've currently got. And for me, that's the segue into full electrification. But if we don't do anything now, we're going to have diesel trains for the next 30 years through the latest procurement piece. And I think Graham said earlier, a diesel biomode is still a diesel train. So how do we get away from that? And so we're adjusting to the industry, the current state of electrification in the UK, and coming up with these products to help remove those diesel trains.
Yeah. Noel, so F&F have been working any number of different innovations to try and give as many tools to the industry as possible to make the cell. But what do you think? What is within the elbow room we have, and we've just had the spending review, it's not given us much, but it's given us something. What do you think? What is it that you think we can be doing, and what could we be doing more of? Innovation to one side.
I have two things. One, for everyone here, everyone in the industry, I think wrongly hung our hat on decarbonisation. So as soon as you can decarbonise another way, if it's cheaper, let's do that. I think we forgot why we electrify railways. You can fit more passengers on trains. Those trains get to their destinations quicker. Those trains are more reliable. They cost less to maintain. They cost less to run. So going back to Ollie's point earlier about investment, it is just a good investment. I sometimes feel on innovation, which you told me not to mention, you get involved. The government likes innovation. It's hoping for some magic bullet that will solve things. I brought an innovation here, which this is a tent, and this is a product called sky hooks, which are used to hang things from the top of tents. And I think sometimes the government wants something like this. They don't want to build masts and wires and substations. They just want a sky hook that can hang the wire without any cost.
Everyone, I'm sorry.
So yeah, if anyone wants to invest in sky hooks for railway, give me a shout afterwards.
So we've got this picture where we, as an industry, have. I get very frustrated. I'll tell you what. Let's set out some context. To reach the government's own net zero targets, we need to be achieving between 400 and 500, potentially 600 single-track kilometres of electrification each year to reach net zero by 2050. That's the government's own targets. We have not achieved even a tiny fraction of that in the several years since the Traction Decarbonisation Network Strategy. What was that? So we've had an increasingly restrictive financial environment, and the challenge we've got is that the railway exists not for 1 year, not for 2 years, not for 5 years, but for centuries. And even if you get the thing that comes back so often is, taxpayers' money though. And I have to remind people, and I might try and say this in every single session I'm at here, we will pay tax, all of us, for what? Our entire lives, VAT, then income tax, then X, Y, Z, 80 years minimum of tax that we will pay. If we thought about taxpayers' money in those timescales rather than what we currently have as an industry, which is a 1 year capital spend look ahead at best, then maybe we'd make better and more efficient views of how to spend that money. So, with all that waffling, Ollie, I want to leave the industry where it is for a minute and say, from a political perspective, within the world of kind of the parliamentary estate and MPs, what is kind of the understanding of the role of electrification? Is it a pretty skin deep, that's just a nice extra bit that the railway wants to spend, or is there a pretty good and deep understanding of the kind of the broader benefits of electrification within the parliamentary estate?
I'd say it's pretty limited, and that's not surprising, really, because one of the challenges of being an MP is that, lots of your constituents come to you with things expecting you to be an expert on everything. You can't be an expert on everything. You have to know a little bit about lots of things. So there's not that many of us who've come into House of Commons from a rail background. So that's why I sort of see it as my role to challenge some of the emerging very British orthodoxies on these topics, which are rather anomalous in European context. And I think that's to be honest, if I'm going to give the industry and some of its masters some credit, they're doing very well at convincing MPs that discontinuous electrification is a proven technology, that everyone is using it everywhere, and this is what we should do. You can get all the same benefits for a lower price. They are doing a very good job of that. Whether that is entirely factually correct remains to be seen, because apart from a handful of units in South Wales, it's not really in use. And if you take the example of something like East West Rail, where we're proposing discontinuous electrification and batteries for a railway that's designed to have 4 trains an hour and 100-mile-an-hour operation, there is no railway anywhere in the world that does that using discontinuous electrification and batteries. I'm very happy to be corrected on that. Please do come and tell me if there is one. So it's not the case that this is proven. Yes, it has potential, and I'm all for it on branch lines, secondary lines of limited freight potential, low frequency. that's fine. But when I hear it being talked about as a reason to not electrify Bristol Temple Meads because it's too difficult, and every train that serves Bristol Temple Meads is going to have batteries, when I hear it as a solution for avoiding electrifying some of the cuttings and tunnels on the Midland Main Line, I just think we're really losing our way here. And we need to regain our confidence in civil engineering that British Rail once had, and I think it's time to combine the experience of people from those days with the bright new engineering minds coming forward and create some sort of competition for how we can electrify difficult structures, so that we can get back to deciding the right electrification solution for the right bit of railway. And it should be based on traffic criteria and potential, not where's got the difficult structures. It should be based on, as you said, what's high frequency, what's high speed, what's intercity, what's freight today and future potential. And we should have clear criteria for what should be full electrification, partial electrification, or for things like maybe the far north lines in Scotland, very likely traffic. That's where hydrogen might have a role. That's what I think we should be doing.
So this comes back to a drum that I like to beat relentlessly, which is about storytelling. It's about telling the right story. Noel's already alluded to the fact that decarbonisation and selling decarbonisation of rail, the decarbonisation of rail, we should not care about decarbonising rail. We're already extremely good at that. What we should be caring about is decarbonising transport, for which an electrified railway is far better than any other at driving modal shift towards railways and therefore decarbonising transport. We didn't get that story right as an industry. We found the latest thing we could just about grip onto to try and convince, within the realms of building a business case to Treasury, to try and convince them that electrification was the right idea. I'm with you kind of all on this one. I think that the role of, as you say, no regrets electrification with gaps that you can fill later, it's kind of the way that one of the ways to describe discrete, discontinuous electrification, is a way to deal with the elbow room we have, but we have to be careful about the story we paint. John, again, I suppose in terms of storytelling, what is that story? Again, I know we've talked about systems thinking being really important, but what is that story that Siemens are trying to paint in terms of the picture of how you paint that picture, ensure we don't fall into the pitfalls of the decarbonisation mistake? How are you telling that story?
So, just coming back to all this, I agree entirely with some of the things you're saying. But we're stuck in a situation at the moment where we've wasted 10 years. Yep. We haven't done electrification. Yep. Rolling stock needs to be renewed, and we need to do something different. So we can't go back. We can only go forward. And I don't think there's going to be the level of investment required to do 400 or 500 track kilometres of electrification. There isn't the money in the economy. So how do we do that stepping stone? And for me, that is the discontinuous electrification. And I agree, it's got to be select routes. We can't do it everywhere. There's certain routes where it's ideal, and the infrastructure that we're designing from the RCC, which is a small SFC, allows you to take domestic supplies, allows you to feed 25 kV onto a railway. Whether you've got a power capacity issue on the East Coast Main Line and you want to put some extra juice in there from a D&O supply rather than a £100 million grid supply, that product allows you to do that. It allows you to charge trains. It allows you to electrify sections of railway whilst you then electrify the infills, which may take a lot longer because you've got structure works to do, etc. So, it's about creating a flexible strategy which will then enable electrification. My role is electrification director for Siemens. I want electrification. I'm not here going, oh no, electrification is really bad. Of course, it provides better trains, but the next best thing besides having an electric train is a battery electric train. The performance is not far off. Yeah? Whereas a diesel train, it's like 3 times less efficient. There's loads of pollutants. So why would we be investing now in rolling stock that's diesel when there's an opportunity to buy battery biomodes and we can create the infrastructure? There's the RCC that we built here as a test track around here to demonstrate the philosophy, make sure it works. And for us, that's the stepping stone to full electrification.
If I could just briefly, I agree with a lot of that, but I want to come back on a few things. You say there isn't the money in the economy. Why is Albania committing to electrification? Greece, Hungary, Slovakia, all of these countries that are smaller economies than we are, don't you think we should have rather more confidence in our nation's ability? These are political choices. This is not because there is no money. Absolutely in no way. I very much disagree with that. Look, if we were talking about doing this as a stopgap, I would support that. And that indeed, that's in Ireland, that's what they're doing. We had a select committee visit there to see what they're doing with rural bus primarily, also talked about some rail. And they're very clear that they are looking at procuring battery EMUs as a stopgap until they can complete their rolling electrification programme. I know for a fact that here that is not necessarily what we're talking about. So I've met with Network Rail engineers about what they're doing in Scotland, the Fife Circle, discontinuous electrification. They said our original assumption would be a stopgap and then we'd fill the rest in later. But now, because of miracle battery technology, we don't need to bother. And already the goalposts are being moved and people are looking for it as an excuse to not wire up properly. And that's what really concerns me, because for our busiest lines, we're introducing more complexity to rolling stock, potentially more cost, although perhaps you'll correct me and you'll tell me that battery trains are cheaper than EMUs. Be interested to know about that. And we're introducing more operational complexity. And that's really what concerns me.
So
It's suitable for certain lines and not for others.
So without wanting to get into an argument over discontinuous being good or bad, because that isn't necessarily the point of the chat. What is fun is that, and this kind of makes my storytelling point for me, is that we have a situation where the industry is going, there's no money, and the politician here is sat telling us that that's not true, which I'm inclined to say I agree, because the reason there's no money in our economy is because the government isn't spending that money. That's how it works, by the way. But this is interesting about the storytelling, and it's not that we shouldn't be telling the story about the innovations that we've got there available. It's perhaps that we as an industry, far too often we internalise some of that narrative telling us there's no money, because we've been hearing it for 70 years. Noel, on the storytelling picture, what else, some of the examples of stories, you talk to a lot of people trying to make the pitch about electrification across the board. In terms of that storytelling, what are some of those other stories that you think have successfully cut through? And I'm also thinking about skills, about increasing the skills in the economy, about changing working patterns, about changing types of skills. I
think at the moment it's a pessimistic story on skills, in that since the peak in 2018 when we had Great Western electrification, when you look at NSAR's figures for how many people are in electrification, it's fallen by 65%. And
how many people individually is that roughly?
It went from about 10,500 people. So that's people like from project managers, engineers, people on site installing, down to just over 4,000, and I think by the end of the year it's forecast to be 3,500 people.
This is brief. For anyone who wonders why there's no money in the economy, it's because when government invests, those people have jobs, and that money then goes into the economy. So if you don't invest, what was that? 7,000 plus people who are no longer employed in a high-skilled role are no longer paying taxes, and therefore there's less money in the economy. The investment, this is a thing that we as an industry have internalised horribly, is the idea that there's money first and that we only get a bit of that pot. No, the money comes from us having the investing and then people having jobs and paying taxes. We need to spin that on its head. Sorry, Noel, it's a really important point. I have a nice big audience and I want to indoctrinate you all into let's not repeat government's nonsense back at us.
And I think when you do come to electrify HS2, which is a few years off construction, and East West Rail, whether that's discontinuous or full electrification, a lot of people will have left the industry by then, and that's my fear, is the people with skills are going to big projects around the country like National Grid. They're working on those projects 9 till 5, Monday to Friday. Those people will never ever come back to rail and working midweek nights. It's just not going to happen. If we want skills to remain in our industry, we need the money to at least carry on with the existing projects. So you look at Midland Main Line, 2/3, 50%, 60% done, and it's essentially stopping right now without further funding, and those people are leaving the project. It's crazy that something like Midland Main Line will not be fully electrified. And so things like that, which won't take a huge amount of money, they've already done a huge amount on efficiencies. We've mentioned things like bridge lifts earlier. There's 80% less bridge lifts on Midland Main Line than there were on Great Western. The industry's already done loads. Some of those are things like Siemens, surge arresters and the like. But yeah, the industry's already done a lot to reduce costs, but without a rolling programme, you can't reduce it more.
Yep. Right, I want to move us into something that's a little bit more overall optimistic, because that was pretty heavy. There's a lot of very, very glum-looking faces. But there is, I've alluded to the hope a little bit earlier, that we have this moment to really shift the way that the industry not just is structured, and I want to come back to systems thinking shortly, but also how we speak with a voice to the public as well as to industry. At the moment, we don't really have a public voice. We don't get a public voice. Everything has to go through government. And one of the potential good things about GBR, or possibly the flip side, one of the potential worst things, is that we either get a more autonomous voice or even less of a voice. We have the chance to make sure we shape it for the good. I want to talk about systems thinking, because one of the opportunities with GBR is that we start moving into a world where you stop thinking about electrification, fine, good, but it's very output driven. Outcomes are more important. Things like improved journey times, improved frequencies of trains, improved performance of trains so you can fit more trains on a given track with our ultimately very mixed traffic railway. Do we think, John, do you think the opportunity is being seen within the upper ends of government, the people who are potentially shaping GBR, to exploit the retying of the industry together for some of these systems benefits? Do you think that is coming through?
Yeah, I think the track and train, bringing the rolling stock together with the infrastructure, making sure the infrastructure is ready when the trains are and the trains ready for when the infrastructure is ready. I think that's a great opportunity for our industry.
Definitely.
I think the piece that's really difficult is the risk side of it and managing the risk. So if we're looking to try and get funding to do infrastructure works alongside, say, a Roscoe funding a train, how are we going to deal with that risk piece? The unknowns. We can find dealing with the knowns, we can manage the risks around that, but it's the unknowns. It's what's the extra work that's going to be required to bring the current railway up to standard. And that's where there's a massive concern from our side. But I think it's a brilliant opportunity for the industry. Where we've been during the electrification, I know some good work's been done on Midland Main Line and some of the other routes. It's very fragmented procurement at the moment. Mm-hmm. So we're splitting out the OLE, we're splitting out the traction power, we're splitting out the civils. We're not even designing electrification system as a system. We're discrete parts. And we talk about innovation, but if you don't own the whole, you can't bring in innovation. You can't do the things like we've done in Denmark, where we've increased span lengths to 110 metres. I mean, it's 30% less materials. You need 30% less people to do it at the same time. That's a lot. That's value to the industry, and we've really missed on an opportunity by having this fragmented procurement. We have every tender's based on what's your fee, not what your value is, not what your proposition is. What is your offer? How do you drive down the cost of electrification? We can do it by doing this. We can change the traction power. We can do it so it's converter fed rather than via these expensive grid connections. There's lots of things we can do, and we've really missed that opportunity. With the track and train, if we're specifying what the railway looks like, whether it's a section of electrified track, we get to specify that innovation in that offer.
Yep. Right, I am conscious of time, and I want some questions, because I think there might be a few chin-scratchy people out there with some thoughts. Please keep your questions extremely brief, because the more questions, nice and brief, the more questions, the better. Question at the front. Have we got a microphone roaming around? There was one around. Yes, there is. It's coming. Yes, question at the front. Pop your hand up, and then were there any other questions? Because I'll send the microphone back to you once a question is asked. Stunned silence from everyone else. Question at the front. If you let us know who you are as well.
Sullivan, a former Transport Users Consultative Committee for the Midlands. I commend Ollie Gulliver's article in Met Rail, April, and everything he says is absolutely right. I'm very glad that he's continuing to argue for this. There are two fundamental questions, though, which will come back to Parliament. Firstly, the very obvious one, that electricity is costing twice what it cost in 2015. The figures were in New Civil Engineer, and they've doubled.
The question, it's just...
That's the first question. What are you going to do about that? The second, and this is, you have to face this, you do need to go back to the British Rail Mark 3B electrification, which is simpler, cheaper, less intrusive. And if you don't like that, go to Denmark and get their design. What we can't carry on with is this ugly stuff that Furrow and Fry have put on Network Rail.
A reminder that the reason that GWEP looks big and chunky is because it was to be installed quickly and therefore more cheaply. And material costs are a tiny part of electrification. The first question is a very good one, though, on the energy costs, because that is ultimately a big political question of where we get our energy from. And the railway can't do a huge amount about it, much as we'd like to. Well, we are doing a couple of things, massive solar installations, for example. I'll come to you, John, Ollie, politically, and then we'll come to what can we do about energy. But politically, what are we doing about energy costs?
Yeah, just very
on your second point, very briefly, I think there has been quite a lot of progress on that in terms of like looking at Midland Main Line. They're using much more cantilever structures, so just rather than enormous things that are designed to withstand an EF5 tornado and things. So I think there has been some progress on that, more to be done. Yes, I mean, of course, on electrification doesn't exist in isolation, and we do need to reduce energy costs. There are a lot of dysfunctional elements about how the UK energy market works in terms of the wholesale. If your electricity is being generated by gas for 1% of the day, then in that day the unit price is based on the current gas price, and that just doesn't really make a lot of sense. I will confess I'm not an expert on that, but definitely it needs reform, and we need to be doing a lot more to generate using renewables and reconfigure our energy grid to be able to take account of that. We're still building houses in my constituency without solar panels on, and contrary to perception, Oxfordshire does have a lot of sunshine. So we're missing out opportunities for that. And to be fair, the government does have some good plans on that. But I will come back to my point about what's happening in the rest of the continent. We're not the only country that has significant challenges with electricity prices. Germany does as well, and you haven't had Deutsche Bahn there parking up enormous sways of electric locomotives. In fact, the German government has decided to invest in terms of subsidies to maintain electric freight operation because they see it as inherently more efficient. So again, it does come down to choices. But your point about the energy system is a good one.
Yeah. John?
Just quickly, obviously electricity compared to diesel is about a third of the cost, isn't it, per kilometre? So that's worth pointing that out. We definitely want to be in the electric era. The second one, renewables into rail. We're pushing for converter-fed railway. That allows you to bring renewables directly where you need it into the rail, into the infrastructure. So the RCC that we've built will allow you to bring renewables straight in, same as the SFCs we built at Hambleton, the one we're building at Ravensthorpe. You can bring renewables, solar power straight into the railway at that point, which obviously is addressing some of those concerns around energy prices.
Any other questions? Hands up if you have questions. There's a question at the back, lady at the back here. There are big plans for some energy generation directly into the railway, which is exciting. But
I should have mentioned Austrian railways do quite a lot of that. They have their own solar and wind turbines as part, providing their own power. So there's some good examples there. So.
Hi, Jo Davey from Winter Phillips Associates. A lot of work has been done in this space already around looking at future electrification, how it can be done, tied into the rolling stock strategy we were discussing this morning for the likes of Network Rail, JBR-TT, RIA, and I just wonder what your thoughts are on why that hasn't had the desired impact and how we might learn from those and have a different approach going forwards.
So embedding the relationship between traction strategy and train strategy, if you like. Who wants to... Ooh. I mean, it's a good idea. I think we've already addressed that we agree with it, and it's a good idea, but I suppose why is it not picked up traction?
So, the latest...
Thank you.
Latest rolling stock procurement brings in the infrastructure element to it. That's the first time that we've got that close to it. And we're going through those tender processes at the moment on TransPennine and Northern. And it allows us to do the system design around what we think is the most optimal from an electrification or a charging perspective to allow us to bring in an electric via mode or a full electric train. So that's the closest we've ever got. Let's see where it takes us over the coming months, years.
It spins me into a thought. Sorry, I wanted to maybe see what Noel maybe thought on this one.
Definitely.
Monopoly is a challenge. One of the challenges of going this route, we're going to optimise the infrastructure and the trains on this route, is that it means that you have a situation potentially where it's optimised for one provider of the total solution, and indeed in some cases restricts, because there are only so many people who have the dominance of, for example, as Siemens Mobility, who really do very successfully do the whole package of traction, power supply, and rolling stock. How do you manage that? Is it just a case of the standards ensure that it will allow others to run, or do you think what do you think? No, I suppose Noel. Rather than putting John on the spot with that, Noel, do you have any thoughts on that monopoly element and what that can look like?
I think as long as you're following interoperability, I don't think it's an issue. Obviously I work for a company who doesn't do trains. But I think as long as you're interoperable, it's not an issue. On the electricity point, places like Switzerland and Germany, the railway also own their own grid as well, so they have a lot better control over energy costs and prices. And I think, I know there's a lot of interest. We've been to conferences recently. There's been a lot of interest in running cables down the railway corridor as well. So it's definitely something I would like to see.
Yep.
Sorry, to answer that question, because I realise I haven't at all. I think for the past few years, places like Rail Industry Association, Rail Forum, we've all been trying to convince the wrong people. When I speak to departments, various government departments, DFT, Department of Business and Trade, they all know the arguments. They all understand them. They all agree. When I speak to MPs, they all agree. When I speak to ministers, they all agree. I think we just forgot to go to Treasury and try and explain it to them, because they're ultimately the people who hold the purse strings and the people who don't believe in us.
And I'd almost say even that maybe isn't. It's not a bad idea to go out with as many artillery shells loaded in the wheelbarrow as possible to Treasury. But I'd say, as an industry, we need to rediscover our voice a little bit and be prepared to take that voice to the public, because there is no better advocate for what a proper, finished, good, modern, efficient railway looks like than the general public. And I think, as an industry, not all of us are tied down by the political constraints that, I know that Network Rail is a giant monopsony, but not all of us are tied down by the constraints of Network Rail necessarily, and even Network Rail can probably say a bit more within its remit than it does. But the public are there to be convinced. And if we convince the public of what a good, finished, effective railway looks like, then they might then take the daggers to Treasury. So that's how I think, given time, and no one seems to be waving a hand at me desperately, I might end there. That has been a tremendous chat, I hope. I've had a lot of fun. I even got one laugh for one of my jokes, which is, thank you, I'll give you the tenner later. But no, that was fab. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you very much to the panellists. Thank you to all of you for being here at the Engineering Theatre. We have so many more good sessions today, and for those of you on both days sweating it out tomorrow. Hopefully see all of you for the chat with Mona momentarily, but thank you all.